The networks that you're representing in the studies done by the National Association of Hispanic Journalists for 10 years, 11 years, and I did 2 of the studies, for 11 years in a row, the percentage of news about Hispanics has not exceeded 1% of the news. And anybody here, you can speak out loud, what are the top 2 topics on which Latinos are covered in the national news? Number 1? Number 2? Crime. Immigration and crime. 11 years in a row with the same situation. Now we go back to the Kerner studies that pointed out the gap in terms of the diversity of America and the reality of America, and that continues, so that money that has been spent in other areas should not be excluded, but I think it should be brought to the forefront on the home front here in the United States. Vivian, what's the percentage of Hispanic news on National Public Radio and all its programs? Do you know what that is?
I don't.
I'll tell you, one of my students did a study this year, and in 2007 and 2008, it was less than 1%. And it had a little bleep during the election year because I was interviewed on Talk of the Nation for 20 minutes, and that made the bleep. So okay, comments on that coverage.
What's the question?
The question is, what could you suggest in this media literacy that we're talking about, news literacy, to improve the local coverage of the challenges of the changing demographics of the United States?
Anybody want to answer?
I would say 2 things. First of all, you're completely right. I mean, there are 2 separate questions. First of all, local news is in big trouble, and I don't know the answer. It is in big trouble, and until the FCC decides to give local news stations money to do news, I don't know what the answer is. It's a very, very, very big problem. And on your second question, I think we're completely inadequate, and we do not cover the Hispanic population enough. We just last week, I mean, we under-index. We have very few Hispanic viewers, and I'm sure most of that is because we do very little content that's of any interest to Hispanic viewers. So I completely take, not personal, but responsibility, and I think that's something that we've started to really address. I mean, first of all, it's bad business. I mean, it's a huge audience, so why are we not appealing to that part of the population? Last week we did a series on Nightly called We the People, and it was specifically about that, and it was just a way for us to begin to try and kick that off. We are looking to try and have more Hispanic reporters. But you're right, I think that news has completely underserved that part of but at least I can speak for television news. I think television news has been woefully inadequate.
May I throw the question back at you? Because I know that in certain markets like Los Angeles and Miami, for example, there are Spanish language television stations in those communities that in fact are sometimes the #1 and #2 stations in that community. So clearly they are getting a huge part of that audience, and those people are making, in other words, the people who run those stations are making money by attracting that particular audience.
That is true. The challenge is that 75% of the Hispanic population in this country is either bilingual or primarily English-speaking nowadays because they're 2nd and 3rd generation. So the other part of the story, indeed, Spanish language stations do serve their communities in television news, not radio news. That's a wipeout practically across the country. But we understand, it would be easier for any one of us to understand that the story about Black America should not only be told in Black media. The story about Hispanic America, Latinos in the United States should not be exclusive to the Latino media because it's part of the American story that has to be told across the country.
Yeah, that's not what Ted was suggesting. He was saying that there is obviously a significant market that could actually be tapped into.
No, and I don't want to suggest that is true. Because of the linguistic differences, though, obviously Spanish-speaking people are clearly bringing their business to television stations that are serving it.
But it also raises a larger point, your very provocative question, and that is something that's hard to get to, but probably worth trying to get to in the news literacy course, which is what's missing, what's not being covered. It's very hard sometimes to spot what isn't there, especially if you're relatively new to news consumption. Neil?
Well, I sort of adding to that, I think most of the examples that were shown this morning were individual stories that were being kind of deconstructed. And I don't know to what extent you also look across an entire publication, entire newscast over a period of time and say, and it probably gets more towards news criticism than news literacy, but I think it has an element. And I'm still a believer that as these things, these are opportunities. They occur, And, you know, if one medium leaves something uncovered, and there's a huge audience of people that have the economic resources that advertisers want to reach, somebody's going to find a way. And the nice thing about a lot of what happens online, other than, you know, the gap in access to online, is that you can do that a lot quicker, a lot cheaper, and a lot more economically. And so there are a lot of niche markets, or, you know, niche meaning just a focus, not the size of it, that are going to get better service online than they've ever gotten in print or broadcast.